Of course, South Africans are celebrating the 2-0 victory that Bafana Bafana recently had. The questions are being asked whether it makes sense to host this event from a financial perspective. I suppose particularly in light at a time when South Africa is battling with growth, we have other financial priorities. So we're posing that question to our panel today. As I said, Mark Ashton joining me, Finweek editor. We've also got Finweek deputy editor Thandi Sizwe Makhluchana joining us. And of course, joining us from Kickoff, senior writer Tiani Mabasa and Michael Goldman, senior lecturer at Gibbs. Welcome to you all. Thanks so much for joining us. So there we go, Mark. We're talking about Afcon. We're talking about does it make sense to host an event like this? You chose to go the economic route, of course, being Finweek. What stood out for you when it comes to the numbers that you were looking at?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think we take one step back. We inherited a tournament we didn't actually want. I mean, we were supposed to be looking to host it in 2017, and obviously there was a crisis in Libya, and South Africa stuck its hand up and said, "Great, we'll come on board and we'll try and take over this tournament." We took over at a very short notice. We ultimately had to take 461 million rand from National Treasury, allocated from the various provinces toward the tournament itself. I mean, there were interesting little side stories which I'm sure we'll get into just now, but the issue around Cape Town, for instance, not being able to host any of the tournament, was there enough marketing done around it? Was there a real spin-off for sponsors? And then, I mean, James, who wrote the story, a big part of the story, actually took the next aspect and said, you know, we're so busy sending troops into the rest of Africa with very under-resourced, and yet here we are taking 461 million rand to bring the rest of the continent here. We inherited something. We probably did a good deed in terms of the problems that Libya is facing, but, you know, was it for the benefit of South Africans? We conclude probably not. Okay, so that's where you came to at the end of the article.
Tiani, did South Africa have a choice whether it could decide to host the Afcon Cup earlier than 2017?
Yeah, they did have a choice. You know, I mean, they didn't have to agree to all this. And they could easily say, well, we're sticking to 2017 and we don't have to host it now. But for some reason, they opted to host it now. And I just can't find a good enough reason to take it now, you know, to be honest, you know, because like he said, you know, they took it at short notice. No marketing was done. And the only marketing that was done was basically by the journalists writing about the Afcon. That's as far as it goes, you know, so they had a choice, yes.
They had a choice, and I suppose they made their choice perhaps in haste. When you look at the numbers, 461 million rand that Pravin Gordhan had to agree to take money from National Treasury, how big a chunk of the overall budget is that? I mean, is that money that could, I suppose, be better spent in other key priority areas?
Look, I think some people might argue that it's money that could have been used for other financial needs of the country in terms of development. For example, if you look at Cape Town asked a lot of questions, and I'm sure we'll get to it. They asked a lot of questions before they signed and said, sure, we will be a host city. And when the CAF and the local organizers didn't come forth with the answers to those questions, Cape Town said, well, we can't go into this without necessary questions, because they felt that because each host city also has to put money forward. So Cape Town felt that they might be putting unnecessary pressure on the citizens of Cape Town, and perhaps they felt that it may not be in the best interest of the people of Cape Town. So I do believe that the money that Pravin Gordhan had to go and hustle up in the last minute, because he didn't budget for it in February last year, he only made provision for it in the medium-term budget policy statement. So I think the fact that there was that hustling and bustling at the very last minute means that it was not money that was easily available. Therefore, government had to you know, stretch its muscles to go and get the money. So I think it's quite a significant amount of money.
I mean, just looking at Patricia de Lille, speaking on behalf of Cape Town, she basically said they weren't happy with the agreement because of the impact that it could potentially have on ratepayers and citizens who, of course, pay taxes for certain priority areas. So did you think that the type of questions that Cape Town was asking should have been the questions that the government asked when they agreed to host the Afcon?
Well, certainly Cape Town has, you know, the ability to ask those questions, and they're within their rights to decide whether they're going to make Cape Town Stadium available or not. But I think, you know, one needs to look at this at a strategic strategic level, from a geopolitical point of view. And I guess I would argue that South Africa perhaps made the right call in terms of our interest in Africa. South African business is charging into Africa. We need all the support we can get. We need strong relationships into many of the countries that are coming to play at Afcon, and many of the senior executives that might be coming down to support their teams or coming for the hospitality events around the tournament. So, I mean, you could argue that the 461 million taxpayers' funds and perhaps some of the other money that's been put forward to perhaps a 550 million rand budget was quite a bit of money, but perhaps strategically, in terms of the BRICS summit coming up, in terms of our role in Africa, it was an important thing for South Africa to do.
And of course, that's the other side of the coin.
One of the things that, we've had Marikana, it was a really topical hot point issue, and here was an opportunity to really rebuild that whole Rustenburg area, Rustenburg community that's been absolutely shattered with the mine issues. And I think that it's a strategic execution thing. Here's an economy that's crying out for something a little bit different. They are hosting this. It's a very expensive cost of hosting it. And they're rolling out 2,000 people to a stadium with international soccer stars, international teams. What kind of advert does that say for the rest of the continent? I mean, we really missed an opportunity here.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I think a great opportunity mid-year last year for us to take this and think about how we're going to make it a wonderful 2010 follow-on marketing activity for the world, for South Africa. And I would agree with you. I think Vuso Mbebe and the Afcon LOC team had major struggles around when some of their money became available. But even that said, perhaps they didn't fully execute some of the marketing strategies that they could have used to build a lot of excitement around some of the players that would be playing around the country in some of the smaller venues, and really get people out there to support not just Bafana games. And I think, again, if those opportunities had been taken, Afcon could be much more valuable than perhaps it will be, as it turns out.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that was very interesting, talking to some of the sponsors, was, the events, the activations around the games themselves were interesting, but it wasn't high priority for them. One of the points they made was exactly to your point, going out into Africa. They are the pre-tournament and post-tournament build-up are often more valuable to them as sponsors than necessarily the activations that are happening locally.
Let's talk about the empty seats, because I mean that's been an issue. Everyone said some of the games have been sold out, and then you watch the game, and that's not a good marketing for South Africa when you see a stadium that looks on camera like it's half empty. I mean, from the numbers, why are there so many empty seats, Tiani?
Yeah, look, there's some sort of tradition in this tournament that the group matches or the group stage matches normally don't attract big crowds. You have to go back to Equatorial Guinea. There were empty seats. If you go back to Angola in 2010, there were empty seats. And anybody sitting here and saying, you telling him that, well, there are empty seats, they will say, well, what about those other countries as well? Because I think the challenge ultimately is that whoever has to travel need to find the funds, to travel to South Africa. And say, for instance, I'm from Nigeria and I have to travel with my team. It's not going to be an easy task, especially when you are told that it's going to Libya and the next minute it's going to South Africa.
People didn't have enough time to plan.
Exactly.
For World Cup, I mean, you know about it so many years in advance. You can plan that big trip.
And the LOC, they made it worse because in terms of the ticketing, you get to a situation where you have to go buy tickets at Superstar. But when you get there, you pay your cash, you give them your cash, and they say, well, you're on some sort of waiting period for your tickets. So now you're hustling, you're running around, and now they tell you the tickets are there. You go to a spa, they say, well, no, not a spa, a super spa. You see the confusion there,
Yeah, Thandi Sizwe, just before we close off here, any last comments that you'd like to make around, I suppose, to wrap this up, because we've talked about the fact that perhaps not the best way to spend money, that we have other priority areas, but we're also talking about the African agenda being important.
Look, I think he makes a good point. I think from a business point of view, it certainly makes a lot of sense for South African companies that are looking to charge out to Africa, but I also think that we need to balance the needs of South Africa against the needs of each and every South African, against the needs of the political agenda of South Africa, because I do believe that the decision at the very last minute to say that we will take on this tournament and stretch our resources was also had a bit of political influence, because South Africa is actually looking to make itself out to be a white knight or a saving knight, shining armor of Africa.